Hello, I'm Tracy Grimshaw. Welcome to this special edition of A Current Affair. So many questions remain unanswered tonight about how a passenger plane was blown out of the sky over eastern Ukraine, leaving no survivors. Here is the very latest. 28 Australians are among the 298 people who didn't stand a chance when the Malaysian Airlines jet was hit by a surface-to-air missile. Prime Minister Abbott has called it an unspeakable crime and declared tomorrow a day of national mourning. Blame has been pointed at pro-Russian rebels fighting for independence from Ukraine, but they've denied it. A diplomatic crisis is now looming as angry world leaders demand an open investigation amid growing calls for sanctions against Russia. We have reporters in Amsterdam, Kuala Lumpur and Los Angeles covering all developments. And a short time ago, I spoke to freelance journalist John Wendell in the Ukrainian town of Donetsk, near the crash scene, where he'd spent the night filing reports. John, thank you for your time. I think that crash site must be just about the worst place on earth right now. Can you describe what you saw there when the sun came up this morning?
Yeah, the sun came up around 4:30, and like you just said, it was the worst place on earth. It was like hell, actually. I remember telling somebody that earlier today. We walked into the main crash site where the fuselage and the engines had fallen, and most of the aluminum and whatever the body's made of had melted into the ground. Basically, there are rivulets of cold aluminum all over the place, burnt jet engines, and parts of the landing gear, and the grass was all charred, and there were just really sad.
Can you tell me what's happening there today?
I actually took a walk through the fields with three rebels, one of whom is from the kind of small row of houses that lie just off this country lane. And he was saying, he heard two explosions, and he was sitting in his house watching TV, and he ran out of the house and he saw the plane come corkscrewing, spiraling down out of the sky, and then it obviously landed near his house.
Did you get any sense when you were there that rebel forces were actively looking for things like the cockpit voice recorder or the shell that brought the plane down? Anything that they should, want to take away?
No, I arrived a few hours after, maybe 2 hours after the sun had set, and I think by that point they'd already taken the voice or the black box.
Has there been at this stage any attempt to collect the bodies from the site?
They're doing their best to go through and mark the area with strips of white cloth to mark where bodies were, and a lot of the bodies had already been covered up by debris. People had moved debris onto the bodies or plastic or whatever was at hand. And then last night a heavy truck came in to possibly to collect the bodies.
I guess the reason I'm asking you that is because clearly this site is going to be the focus of an international investigation, if indeed investigators can get in there. Did you get a sense that it was being preserved in any way for such an investigation, John?
I myself found a bag full of Dutch passports, a woman's purse, and I photographed the passports just so that that information doesn't end up getting lost in the shuffle of all the luggage and debris that's been found in the bodies and all that. And
we are hearing reports that rebel forces have secured that area. How hard is it to get in, or can anybody get in?
No, they have it pretty well cordoned off. There's checkpoints kind of scattered throughout the Donetsk and Lugansk regions. And last night they posted sentries kind of on the small road leading up to this lane. And then, this morning there were probably about, maybe 10 or 15 fighters. They are trying to control the scene. there is not, as of early this morning, there were not big crowds of people, and I don't expect there to be. The roads are extremely bad.
All right, John, you look absolutely shattered. I think it's probably time you went and had some sleep. Thanks very much for your time with us.
Cheers. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye.
To Kuala Lumpur now, where flight MH17 was headed. Reporter Jane Azapati is there. And Jane, can you describe what's happening at the airport? Because goodness knows Malaysian Airlines has some experience with these situations now.
Yeah, that's right, Tracy. I think what we've seen amongst the Malaysian people today is a little bit of everything. There are obviously some very distraught relatives who've been gathering at the airport all day, desperate for news about their loved ones, in scenes very similar to what we saw 4 months ago in the wake of the disappearance of MH17. This time, though, they did get some answers, although they weren't the answers anyone was looking for. There's also certainly a lot of anger, people questioning why the airline was flying over that airspace as well. And then there's a bit of confusion and disbelief that this same airline could be impacted in this same way again. People sort of thought that the first one was a one-off. People had started coming back to Malaysian Airlines, and then this happens again. And a lot of people here just can't believe it.
What sort of assistance is being offered to families and loved ones of those on the plane and those who think they might have loved ones on the plane?
Well, there has been some confusion and anger among relatives who've been here today, wanting more information from the airline than the airline seems able to give them. The authorities, though, have been, I suppose, a little better at communicating this time around. The Prime Minister addressed the nation and the world very, very early from this airport hotel behind me. Instead of very similar to the press conferences we saw during the search for MH370, but this time, though, he wasn't so much looking for answers as demanding action. He wants a swift response against whoever it is that brought this missile down. We've also heard from the Transport Minister saying that while there is at the moment a confusion, I suppose, among relatives about who was on the plane, they're waiting to identify everybody and identify nationalities first of all before they then release the manuscript of the people who were on the aeroplane. He has, though, said that 40 Malaysian Airlines staff are on their way to Amsterdam to help people there, and there are, of course, Malaysia Airlines staff here at Kuala Lumpur Airport. Tracy?
All right, thanks very much, Jane. Let's go now to Laura Turner, who is in Amsterdam, where the number of Dutch victims stands at 173, far more than any other country. And Laura, I imagine there are very similar scenes there as we're seeing at Amsterdam, at Kuala Lumpur.
Good evening, Tracy. Absolutely. It's a strange atmosphere here at the moment. There's people turning up, lining up for flights. There's a real sense of trepidation. Of course, we know this is the airport where flight MH17 left from and met its very unfortunate demise just in the past 24 hours. And earlier on, as that news broke of the fate of that aircraft, we saw some very distressed relatives turning up to the airport here. It was only a few hours since they dropped their loved ones off to board that plane. They then turned up a few hours later. They're walking the halls, the terminals, desperate for answers, not wanting what they'd heard to be true. It was then that they were whisked off in an airport shuttle bus, taken to a private location and taken into a private room. And that's where the authorities delivered this tragic news to those relatives. Of course, more than 170 Dutch people now have died in this crash, and we don't know the final number of the deceased as yet. So really tragic scenes here at Amsterdam Airport.
All right, thanks very much, Laura. Well, the disaster could well throw the world into a diplomatic crisis, with calls for both the United Nations and the United States to impose sanctions against Russia. To our US Bureau Chief, Robert Penfold now. And Rob, there's been some confusion today about the number, if any, Americans were on board that flight. Can you explain why that is?
That's right, Tracy. No one really knows why this is at the moment, but it's been widely reported, certainly overseas and in some newspapers here and websites, that 23 Americans did die on the plane. But at this stage, there is no official announcement. Now, of course, remember this morning in the Netherlands where they listed off the numbers and the countries where those people were from. But noticeably absent from that was the American death toll. And as I said, 23, they say, have been killed there. We probably are expecting, they say they're expecting probably an announcement to come out in around about 7 hours' time. It's still middle of the night here, so as the day goes on tomorrow, we are expecting also a statement from President Obama, a much stronger statement than he made today.
Yes, he was fairly quiet today, busy today, but quiet, and certainly by comparison with our own Prime Minister Tony Abbott, who was scathing at Russian attempts to blame the Ukraine. Are you expecting that that President Obama will step it up tomorrow?
Oh yeah, certainly so. I do believe that's the case. He actually went on with some fundraising activities in New York today, which did surprise quite a few people considering what happened. And there's an interesting point too, that earlier in the day, they're saying that he actually found out about the disaster, not through his own people, but actually in a phone call with Putin. Putin and he were on the phone discussing the situation about sanctions that have been imposed on, even stronger sanctions that have been imposed on Russia only yesterday. And towards the end of that conversation, they say, Putin then brought up the fact that he heard that there had been an accident involving a plane, and then left it up to the Americans to discover really what was involved after that. But, you know, I think what we're going to hear from Barack Obama is very strong condemnation tomorrow of what happened and what is going on there at the moment, and probably some indication as to what further measures America can take. Although, you know, as we've discussed before, America really is very shy about getting into any sort of war zone situation at the moment, trying to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan as they have at the moment. They certainly do not have an appetite at this stage to get into another battle zone.
All right,
Tracy?
thanks very much, Rob. We're now going to explore what might happen next with two experts we have here in the studio. I'm joined now by aviation expert Jason Middleton and Professor Ben Saul, who specialises in global terrorism. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Professor Saul, I'd like to start with you. Prime Minister Abbott has laid the blame squarely at pro-Russian separatists tonight. He wasn't mincing words. Does that indicate that there isn't now going to be a softly approach with the Russians?
Well, I think the Russians have been supporting these rebels for far too long, arming them and providing funds and support to them. I think the Abbott government is right in calling for an independent international investigation to get to the bottom of who did this and to bring the perpetrators to justice.
How will Russian President Vladimir Putin respond if the West steps up the rhetoric and the condemnation?
Well, it certainly brings a lot of new pressure onto the Russians, and of course the Russians have a veto in the UN Security Council, so they could potentially stymie any effort for an international investigation through the Council. I think it's important for the West to bring pressure for new sanctions on Russia to hurt it where it counts in its economy, so that it does consent to agree to what everybody wants here.
He won't want to find who is responsible and offer them up, will he? Because they're his allies.
That's right, and that's why the Ukrainians need international support, because this happened over their territory. Normally their law enforcement is responsible for investigating these kinds of crimes, but of course that's impossible when rebels control territory and are denying access to the Ukrainian investigators.
So what chance do you give this investigation?
Well, I think the international community has come together before in difficult situations like this. A great example is the Lockerbie case, where a civilian airliner was blown up over Scotland in 1988. And there, of course, the Security Council demanded that Libya hand over the suspects. Libya eventually gave in to the pressure after sanctions were imposed on it for quite a while, and the perpetrators were brought to justice.
OK. Jason, let me come to you for a moment. Let's examine the aviation aspect of what happened here. Can you mistake a passenger jet at 33,000 feet for a military aircraft?
No. Any competent person trained properly to use those sorts of missiles wouldn't have made the mistake. It's almost impossible to believe that it was a mistake. So
do you believe that whoever ordered this strike knew what they were shooting down?
I think they knew what they were shooting down. That's my view of it. And of course it's a tragedy, and it's unleashed this enormous political issue, as well as the poor people on board.
Certainly. The International Aviation Alert said don't fly below 32,000 feet over the Ukraine. But these Buk missiles have a height of, say, 60,000 feet, we're told, or even more. So were international aviation safety authorities and airlines asleep at the wheel on this?
Well, that's a difficult call on two grounds. Firstly, if you identified every problem area throughout Asia right now, there's an awful number of a large number of areas where you'd have to identify problems. I think the main issue, though, is that there had been 2 other aircraft previously shot down in the previous week in that area over the Ukraine, and that should have alerted all the airlines into moving well away from that area.
Because it's tempting to conclude that the fundamental conclusion that we all come to here is that it's cheaper for fuel and straighter to go over the Ukraine rather than going around, and that airlines are under pressure, financial pressure at the moment, and they took the cheap option.
Yes, I'm not sure that they deliberately did it because it's a cheap option. It probably just is the easiest option and the option they commonly used. And of course the pilots themselves simply get a flight plan, and provided the NOTAMs don't indicate that it's no fly, they'll just do as they're told.
Professor Saul, some experts are speculating that this might be in fact a turning point, if you like, in the Ukraine, and that Vladimir Putin will back away. What chance do you give that?
I think it's a reasonable suggestion because, of course, up until now, it's really only the Ukraine that's been suffering at the hands of these separatists and their Russian backers. Now, of course, we've got victims from a whole range of countries who have been killed in this disaster. And so I think that really heightens the pressure on the Russians to back away.
All right. Thank you both very much for your time tonight.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Now let's go to the states hit hardest by this aviation disaster. From Melbourne Airport, I'm joined live by a Current Affairs Greg Thompson, while 9 News reporter Josh Yerger is at Perth Airport. Greg, I'm going to start with you. Victoria is reeling from this tragedy. 10 people who won't be coming home.
We certainly are, Tracy, and that figure went up from 9 to 10 at around 5:30 this evening. Only 6 of those 10 victims have been named publicly, and they were 3 couples. Most of them were over in that part of the world enjoying a holiday. Now, those couples, I'll name them for you, Elaine Teo and Emel Marla. They were a boyfriend and girlfriend who have been together for quite some time. They were aged in their late 20s. Then there was Mornington husband and wife, Liam and Frankie Davison, and the final couple who died in this terrible circumstances was Albert and Marie Risk. They were from Sunbury. I spent most of the day in Sunbury today, Tracy, and that community is devastated by their loss, with Mr. Risk, a prominent businessman in real estate. He was in co-ownership at a real estate site in Sunbury, Rain and Horn. We saw complete strangers coming up to the office to lay flowers, and as you could imagine, the colleagues of those two are absolutely devastated.
Greg, how long before all of the names are released? Because while families are certainly being notified, we know that people are swamping DFAT with phone calls wanting information, not sure whether their loved ones were on that flight. And so those names are important for them.
That's exactly right, Trace. We know at least over 1,000 calls have been made to that DFAT hotline throughout most of the day. But the advice coming from Victorian Premier Dennis Napthine is that there are a number of counselling services as well for those people who are struggling with that wait to find out if their loved ones and friends were on board. We know that the Department of Human Services and the Red Cross have set up a number of counselling services to help with these people as they try to come to grips with this horrible situation.
All right, thanks, Greg. We'll leave it there and we will go to our reporter Josh Yerger, who is in WA. And Josh, Western Australia is carrying a heavy load tonight, 7 dead, including 3 very young children. Tragic.
Yes, Tracy, one of the most devastating stories of this tragedy has originated in Perth. Business consultant Nick Norris was coming back from a family holiday in Amsterdam. With him was his 3 young grandchildren. They were 8, 10 and 12. 8, 10 and 12, some of the youngest passengers on board that flight. They were coming back early to meet the new school term, which starts on Monday. Their parents were with them, but they were coming back a few days later. We understand they're now rushing back to Perth to deal with the devastating fact that they've lost all their children. We also have spoken to a woman who came to Perth Airport a short time ago. She's a mother of a German national who was coming to Perth to try to secure permanent residency. She was here to watch the connecting flight from Kuala Lumpur to Perth to make sure it did arrive and have some closure that her daughter wasn't coming home. That really sums up the mood here at Perth Airport and what really is happening at the moment. Dreadful stories across the country and around the world today. Thanks very much, Josh. We'll leave it for now. We'll be back with more of this special edition of A Current Affair after the break.
Welcome back to this special edition of A Current Affair. When news broke today, one Brisbane family found themselves reliving a nightmare that started when MH17 disappeared 4 months ago. Some family members spoke to Chris Allen earlier today.
Ladies, thank you for your time today. Jeanette, if I could ask you, what was your reaction when you heard that terrible news this morning?
It's just like living day one all over again for us, and my heart just went out to everybody on board that plane and all their families. Just now, it just chokes you, really does. It's just horrible, horrible.
For Jeanette and her two nieces Amanda and Glenda, today's awful news took them back 4 months.
Absolutely, yeah, and the families just joined forces today and all being with each other in support and making sure we're all okay.
It's 4 months since Jeanette lost her sister Kathy and brother-in-law Bob Lawton on flight MH17, now believed to have crashed in the Indian Ocean, killing everyone on board. Amanda and Glenda lost their mum and dad. How did you find out about today's incident, Amanda?
I didn't sleep very well last night, and I jumped on Facebook. It was like 4:30 in the morning. And yeah, I saw Malaysia Air, there's been another flight accident, and I couldn't comprehend it this morning. So I shut off, gone back into that numb headspace.
I went all numb and just didn't know what to feel. You've got these other people out there that are just in the same sort of situation, and just hard to express how you feel.
Today we know MH17 was shot down, but for the Lawton family, there are still no answers as to why their loved ones aren't coming home. 2 months ago, the family held this memorial service for Bob and Kathy. Is it the not knowing that's the hard part for you?
It plays on our minds a lot, yeah.
I don't know if it's harder not knowing because I'm not in the shoes of those families out there. It's definitely hard for us not knowing. Our tragedy is still ongoing, I know, but these people, we just totally understand what they're going through, that rawness. It's just going to be so hard for them dealing with this.
Is there anything you'd like to say to the people today who are finding out that their relatives were on that plane?
Talk about the way you're feeling and have your family and, you know, your friends there to help you as much as you can, because they will help you get through this time.
Just hang on to your family tight and just always be there with them. Just support each other. Yeah.
This family is surviving as best they can, and now they want to help the other Australian victims who are about to go through what they've experienced.
We are thinking of the other families, and if there is anything that we can do to help out, please contact us.
It's just a horrible thing to have happened. Those poor people.
Indeed. Stay with us. We'll have more of A Current Affair after the break. As the Prime Minister said earlier, today has been a grim day for Australia and a grim day for the world. But that is A Current Affair for now. You can keep up with developments as they happen on 9news.com.au, and tomorrow morning there'll be a special edition of Weekend Today from 6 a.m. We'll be back on Monday. Good night.